We're ready for the start. They're off.
Welcome in, everybody. If it's Tuesday, it's time to make things official. For First Bet, there's Jeff Siegel. I'm Jeremy Plonk. At this 5 topics weekly show known as It's Official, picking up steam. The new graphics look. Thanks to Jason Allen and the crew for that. Jeff, as we settle into our new digs, we got old topics to rehash, if you will. 5 of them each week. We've got bonus topics, something near and dear to our heart. A little football action to come up later on the show, so we'll mention that as well. But everybody had their eyes on Woodbine, it seems, last week, including one trainer who really had that place circled.
Yeah, we expected to see really good racing at Woodbine last weekend, and we did. In fact, we may have found not one but 2 legitimate Breeders' Cup favorites in the respective races, maybe even more, but 2 for sure. And Charles Appleby, I mean, this guy, he has perfected the skill of finding the right horse or right horses to bring over to North America, put them where they belong, get them fit and ready, and then win. And that's all he ever does. And these don't get me wrong, these are good horses, but other trainers bring over good horses and you can't find them. This guy, he knows how to win. And we saw at least two sensational performances, actually 3 if you count New York, from this trainer, Charles Appleby. And we have to start taking this guy really seriously now.
Well, let's go to the big board, and that's the setup. It was Charles in charge at Woodbine, at Belmont. What a weekend Charlie Appleby had in the Godolphin Big Blue colors. He came in with Modern Games, the horse who was purse money only last year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. The 3-year-old became the first sophomore to win the Woodbine Mile. Let's go back and take a look with Robert Geller and at the mic.
Modern Games will have to find a way through on the rail. Ivor starts to wind up. Homer Screen dropped out and marched to the arch at the top of the stretch. And it's War Bomber who went to the front with Mighty Hearttown Cruise. And trying to run through is Wakanaka. And down the outside, here comes Modern Games, absolutely punishing them. Modern Games race past them in a blink. And Modern Games out in front, 2 lengths to Finest Sound, who's run to second. And this 3-year-old is a star in the Rico Woodbine Mile. Modern Games, and this time you can cash your ticket. Modern Games by 5 lengths. Ivor second, 3rd Finest Sound, 4th Shirl Spite.
Did you catch the little dig there? And this time you could cash your ticket. Robert Geller rubbing a little salt in the wound, a horse player still from the Breeders' Cup. But look, that was an exemplary performance from Modern Games. Those white socks just reaching for the wire. He's a fun horse to watch in that respect because he can really pick it up and lay it down. And then those white feet that just makes it even look visually more impressive, kind of like a running back with the fancy knee pads or something. I mean, he was really picking them up. And impressive performance for a 3-year-old to beat older horses in this race. Again, going back to 1997 when the Woodbine Mile went to a mile on turf, no 3-year-old had won it. The Europeans had only won it twice. It's not a race they shipped and had a lot of success with. And he laughed all that off from the quarter pole home.
I tell you, that was a great call, by the way. You mentioned that, but punishing them and going by in a blink. I mean, that really is descriptive for this performance by a colt who we remember him from Del Mar last year when he won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf with the foul up in the wagering, and he was scratched, and then he wasn't scratched, and he was allowed to run. And I remember looking at his form prior to that race last year and thinking this horse is an absolute mortal cinch. He didn't have to be a star to win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, but he looked like it. Yeah. And this year, Jeremy, you look at his form. He won the 2,000 Guineas in France. He had run some other decent races without winning. But we watched last week, or actually last Friday when we were handicapping the race, and his performance against Baid. And even in defeat, he looked like top class. And, there was no Baid in this race, but it also gives you an appreciation of how good Baid is, because Baid kind of toyed with this colt. And this colt just laughed at this field and earned a 112 Beyer number, top grass of speed figure of the year. And you very rarely see a number that high for Beyer on turf. And not only that, but he won by daylight. How many times do you see a winner by 5 lengths on grass in the States? Yeah. It's like 10 lengths in the dirt. So I was just overwhelmed with the performance, Jeremy. I don't know how you can describe it other than just a plain old wow. That was memorable, I think.
Yeah, and we don't have a miler in the U.S. domestically who just seems to jump off the page. There's not a Wise Dan this year. There's not that stellar horse in Southern California who's like an Obviously or somebody like that who's a clear-cut division leader. I mean, we've got some good milers in the U.S., but not anything, I think, to deflect away from that. And the Woodbine Mile, I know in the last year or two hasn't had a great impact on the Breeders' Cup Mile, but in the last 10 has been a very, very productive springboard to success in the Breeders' Cup Mile. Even horses who are beaten in the Woodbine Mile have run really well in the Breeders' Cup. This bodes really, really well for modern games coming to the Breeders' Cup Mile. You say, look, Woodbine had the long stretch, and it really flatters that European form and finishing style. You won't get that at Keeneland. That's a fair point, but this horse did it at Del Mar last year, and that's even a shorter run home, I think, than Keeneland on the turf. So he's already answered that, right? He's already answered the call that he can run on an American turf course. He can run on a European turf course with a good second to Baid. And then at Woodbine, where you get a little bit of something, it's kind of a hybrid between an American and a European turf course, and he handled that with aplomb. There's really not a lot to knock. And as far as Charles Appleby goes, Jeff, this trainer's been so successful bringing horses to the U.S., as you mentioned, but even more so to Woodbine. This is the 9th shipper he's brought to Woodbine after this weekend's horses who ran there. 7 wins and a second from 9 starts. Would you take that percentage as an owner?
Yeah, I would do, and I think Godolphin would as well. And I think that's a strength not only of the trainer and his skill, but obviously with the stable Godolphin, who they went through a stretch about 15 years ago where they were not that successful, but now again the horses from that yard just they just fly off the course, and this colt will come back and run in the Breeders' Cup. I don't know whether I doubt he'll run again. He won't have to, but I think in this particular case, trying to figure out who might be competitive with him. I mean, okay, we know Baid's not coming, so I would suggest that nobody from Europe is as good as he is, and nobody from the States is even remotely as good. Right. I mean, he may be he looks even money to me right now if you're talking about a future bet, as long as he stays healthy, because he's in a different world other than Baid, and there ain't going to be no Baid in the Breeders' Cup.
No, just a 3-year-old, so his progressive ability is still there, right? I mean, we don't know how good he might be. A little more Charlie Appleby love if we can. He's run 10 horses in America this year, 5 wins. Of his 10 starts, 7 were in grade 1 races. The other ones are in graded stakes as well. So you're 5 for 10 and 70% grade 1 races this year. But I found this kryptonite, Jeff. And if you don't want to take even money, Charlie Appleby is 18 for 41 in the U.S. lifetime, 44%. He's 0 for 3 at Keeneland, baby. 0 for 3 at Keeneland.
Hey, we're going to hear that
bet against? I don't know. That's a pretty small sample.
I think that stat will find itself somewhere in the Breeders' Cup wagering guide that we'll be putting together shortly. Somewhere along the line, we're going to see that.
Well, if you're trying to get any reason to bet against an even money shot, maybe we can find it there. But we stick with Charlie Appleby and his success on Saturday as we go back to the big board. Woodbine on Saturday, it was Mysterious Night. There was no mystery. He was an odds-on favorite in the Grade 1 Summer Stakes, and he ran like a short price favorite. He delivered on time. Let's go back and take a look with Robert Geller again.
Coming up casually on the inside now is Mysterious Night under William Buick and is going into second spot very easily. And casually comes up to tackle this leader. 94 Expos in front by a length to Mysterious Night. Philip, my dear, winding up in the back. Mysterious Night has gone to the front and raced away from 94 Expos. And battling away is Philip, my dear, 3 or 4 lengths away. But Mysterious Night is a class above them. And Mysterious Night puts this well and truly beyond doubt. The Patterson Summer Stakes, a magnificent win. It is a fantastic 6-length margin, Mysterious Night.
Did you just tell me horses don't win by that kind of margin on the turf?
Well, they don't unless they're trained by Charles Appleby, apparently, because this is the colt, came here, had won the Prix Francois Boutin at Deauville, which was a straightaway 7-furlong race. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why Appleby brought him over for this race, other than the fact that he probably thought the colt was a lead pipe cinch, which he was, is that he wanted to get him around a turn. That would help. Also try him left-handed, just to make sure that, everything would be, easy for him when he came back for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, which he is going to come back. And I haven't seen a 2-year-old in the States that's even remotely this good. He also has a pretty good foundation. He's now won six starts, 3 wins, a second and 2/3. So he's got some experience.
He's run more than Flightline.
Yeah, exactly. And he's only a baby. He's a 2-year-old. Obviously, beautifully bred by Dark Angel. And here's an interesting thing that I looked up. As impressive as he was in this race, he was assigned an 85 Beyer number, which to me is, it's good, but it's not like freaky. But then I went back and checked out what Modern Games earned last year in his race last year. And it was an 87. So
the juvenile.
I don't know if that means he's only 2 Beyer points less than Modern Games was at this time. But if that's the case, that's a little scary for the opposition. And I would suggest that big, good-looking, strong, powerful colt, a Godolphin colt. Maybe something from Europe will show up. I don't see anything around this in North America that's going to touch him.
Well, when you talk Mysterious Night and towards the Breeders' Cup, the juvenile turf is a race that the Europeans have dominated. The juvenile turf is their race. They've owned it. The juvenile fillies turf, though, has been, a house of horrors for the Europeans. They haven't done well with the fillies coming over here. And Chad Brown has a lot to say with that because he always has a good string of 2-year-old fillies here. So if you're looking ahead to your Breeders' Cup, future bets, or just planning towards the Breeders' Cup, Europeans for the Colts on the juvenile side on turf, that's a thumbs up. As for the fillies, though, stay with the domestic horses and the Americans. So as you're handicapping that final round of preps, as they're in progress now and over the next couple weeks, be on the lookout for a juvenile fillies turf horse from the States here that catches your eye in the next couple weeks. But as for the juvenile turf, we may have already seen the favorite and a horse who could be an obvious winner. Let's go to topic 3 this week on It's Official. You hear this Appleby guy? He's pretty good, But what's the commercial for Applebee's? Eating good in the neighborhood, I think. Is what they say. Charlie Appleby ate the most expensive thing on the menu this past weekend. And at Applebee's, I don't know, that's probably like $18. But he was definitely eating good. His Breeders' Cup turf power certainly extended with what happened in the Jockey Club Derby on Saturday during the Belmont at Aqueduct meeting. He had Nation's Pride, or Nation's Day, I should say, back again. And this is a horse who's looked good in all of the 3-year-old turf series in New York. And he finished it off in style on Saturday. Let's go back to Nation's Pride on Saturday in the Jockey Club Derby.
And it is Classic Causeway, and here is Nation's Pride now up on the outside to challenge. Nation's Pride has taken the lead from Classic Causeway. The Gray Wizard down at the rail, then Daunt and Artican. And Nation's Pride is opening up here in the stretch. It is Nation's Pride, and it is Frankie Dettori. He comes back to Aqueduct, and he wins the $1 million Caesars Jockey Club Derby.
And I like to reiterate, horses don't win by 5 on the turf. I mean, he just laughed at him this weekend, Jeff. It wasn't even, like these races were competitive. Now, granted, you're talking some favorites here and you're talking heavy favorites, but turf racing, shorter distances, the Jockey Club Derby was extended longer, but we are just not used to seeing these kind of blowouts on the grass. And from the same outfit, it was laughable this weekend.
Nation's Pride is a good colt. He has one disappointing run this year, and that was in the Epsom Derby when he was actually well back. I think he was 7-1. I don't know what happened to him that day, but his form prior to that was outstanding. His form since then has been outstanding. And I think Nation's Pride is a legit, even though he's a 3-year-old. I think he's a legitimate candidate for the Breeders' Cup turf, even though he'd have to run against older horses, and even though Charles Appleby isn't that keen on bringing him back. And from what I was reading, he's a colt that is going to be kept on in training, obviously, as a 4-year-old. And Charles was quoted in the DRF as saying that he's going to bring him over next year and shoot for the sword dancer and those kind of races and then into the Breeders' Cup. And he also has another colt that I'll mention in a minute, but if I own Nation's Pride, and I'm not telling Charlie Appleby what to do, but that race to me was sensational. Last quarter in 23 flat, and you really have to be motoring to do that. And while you can never really trust the NYRA official times, visually it looked like he was going that fast because he just left everybody behind and did it the right way. And he's an obvious stayer with a good turn of foot, a quality colt who's just getting better. And The thing is, though, that Charles has got another horse that he's bringing over, or at least planning to, and that's a horse named Rebels Romance, who actually runs this Saturday in Germany in a Group 1. Just won a Group 1 in Germany in mid-August. And you may remember Rebels Romance. He was the winner of the UAE Derby a year and a half ago in Dubai as a 3-year-old, won that race by a pole, and then had some issues and had to be stopped down, turned out for a year, and it's back in that kind of form. Right. So that's the one that he's supposed to be bringing over, Rebels Romance. We'll see how he runs this Saturday, and if he runs up to expectations, then he'll be a major player in the Breeders' Cup Turf. But if he doesn't, I wouldn't mind seeing this colt come back. I mean, right. He's getting better, and he's got that great style where he sits close and then he explodes. He's not a deep closer like Charles's winner from last year, Yabir, who had to come from kind of way out of it. Right. But I mean, he is absolutely loaded, and I would think that Nation's Pride would belong, and I kind of hope he gets his chance, even if the other one's good, because I think Nation's Pride, pretty good colt.
And there are no standouts in the American Turf division. We said this about some of the others. So, it's the same Chad Brown trio kind of trading punches on the East Coast.
The Gufos of the world. They just kind of, they're good horses, but they don't scare anybody.
Right. Arklow. I mean, they're nice horses, but a good European will handle them over 1.5 miles on, some softer conditions that we'll likely get at Keeneland in the fall. So we'll see. Charlie Appleby's probably got the favorite for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. He's probably got the favorite for the Breeders' Cup Mile. And he may have the favorite for the Breeders' Cup Turf, depending on what he sends over here as well. Could be another big day. He had a big day last year at Del Mar, of course. Yep. We'll see if he can snap that 0-for-3 at Keeneland. We're going to hammer that home. Let's go to our fourth topic this week on It's Official. It was all good for Wine and Roses for Charlie Appleby, but Steve Asmussen had a Saturday he'd probably like to forget. Now, let's be real here. He had some Saturdays this summer at Saratoga that were as memorable as you'll get. So it's good to be Steve Asmussen, regardless of having a bad Saturday every once in a while. And he had one with a couple big favorites going down, especially in the Iroquois Stakes, where we saw a disappointing run from Echo Again. There was a pace showdown that we want to take you back to, where Damon's Mound and Echo Again were the two favorites, and they did themselves in.
On the far turn, Echo Again and Damon's Mound knocking heads to the quarter pole. Damon's Mound on the inside, set down for the drive. Echo Again is right there. They're shoulder to shoulder off the turn, top of the stretch now. Echo Again's in front. Damon's Mound is back into second. Closers coming quickly. Here's Curly Jack. Here's Jace's Road. Here's Hone down the outside. In behind it's Hayes Strike. There's 1 furlong to go. And Curly Jack has come away with the lead. Jace's Road rallying inside. Hone down the center. Final 16th. It's Curly Jack digging in. Hone trying to get by second, but it will be Curly Jack from off the pace to win it. Hone was second. Jace's Road was third. Hayes Strike was fourth. Off the board, both Damon's Mound and Echo Again.
If you had those in your suicide pool for football purposes, you're out early in the season. You did not expect to see those two runners off the board in the Iroquois. Jeff Pace makes the race, and there's that old saying, too, that it's not how fast you go, it's how you go fast. The fractions didn't look blistering in there for those two horses stretching out a distance, but they were at each other the entire way. So it was a highly contested pace. Even though the 6 furlongs and 111 and change was not a ridiculous split, it was enough to do them in. Thoughts on the favorites going down and the winner here, Curly Jack of the Iroquois?
I was really disappointed because I thought Echo Again was a coming star. I loved his win at Saratoga, and I knew that from in my heart that it would be a bad gamble. He went off at 3-5 because I hate the stretch out off just one sprint. Usually you're not seasoned enough. You're not tight enough. Steve doesn't train him hard enough to train him up. It's not like this is Baffert or somebody where they're going to work 7, 8, and 24 about 3 times. And I just thought because he was on the outside draw that he would drop over and kind of stalk and just kind of relax and then kick it in from the 3/8 pole to the wire. It was a poor gamble at 3-5, but it was also a very disappointing race because Echo Again actually got that kind of trip. I mean, they didn't gun him out to the lead. He was actually, sitting 5th early. He kind of gradually moved up without being asked. went after a decent sort of colt for sure in Damon's Mount, and looked like he put him away. And then that 27-second fourth quarter, I mean, that was a killer. And if I'm Steve Asmussen, or if I have anything to do with Echo again, based on his pedigree, being by gun runner, I have to be, wow, well, that was a rude awakening. And then the other colt, Damon's Mount, I was a little less high on him. I thought maybe he was just a sprinter, but still, he's still a decent sort of colt who can carry his speed at least 3/4. What we had here over a dead, tiring, maybe pro closers track was a complete meltdown. And Curly Jack, who won the race, and being by good magic, a son of Curlin, kind of maybe a late developer, won the race. But maybe the key there for Tom Amoss was, instead of putting him on the lead, which he had been doing, they grabbed him, took him back, made one run, and the race shape kind of propelled him. I don't know how good a race this was. The runner-up, Honed, earned a 38 buyer number in his maiden win. That ain't going to win too many group races. So no. I don't think this, as disappointing as I was and as high as I was on it with Echo again, I'm just not sold on this race. I don't think this race is going to produce the Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner.
No, you got the Breeders' Futurity coming up at Keeneland, Grade 1 at this mile on a 16th trip again. I don't think you come back with these kind of horses and try to get to the Breeders' Cup that way. There's the Kentucky Jockey Club Thanksgiving weekend, a mile and a 16th. I think that's where you try to train and put some stamina back into a Damon's Mount and into Echo again. And if you're going to try to make these horses 3-year-olds of note on the trail next year, I think it's through the Jockey Club, the Kentucky Jockey Club race in November, Thanksgiving weekend at Churchill would be a better deal than trying to cram these horses to make them Breeders' Cup horses. Off of that performance, I just don't see you getting back on the beam that quickly, and then you're cramming another start in October before the Breeders' Cup. That just seems out of whack. As for Curly Jack, the winner in there, Tom Amoss is having an outstanding year with his 2-year-old crop. I ran some BetMix database stats last week for some other races. It was one of the things that really stepped out, that Tom Amos's 2-year-olds this year are running really, really well. So he's had a good crop of them. He gets a stakes win here. Will they develop and continue? We'll see if they were win early types and prep to win. But Tom's 2-year-olds, keep an eye on him in the immediate right now, because he's probably still got some more to unveil as we get into the Churchill September, into Keeneland in October. And then pressing on back to Churchill for their November meet. So Tom Amoss is going well. But again, the tough weekend for Steve Asmussen continued is we thought he'd get a little bit more out of his Pocahontas entry as well, but that wasn't the case. Is the Pocahontas Stakes. We'll go back and take a look with recap here with the call.
Friendly Persuasion up to confront Grand Love. They shoulder to shoulder right off the turn. They brush top of the stretch. They're trying to hang in there. Fun and Feisty continues to roll. And Fun and Feisty over the top and to the front. Shoplifter trying to rally down inside. Grand Love gives way with Friendly Persuasion and Boss Lady Bailey. But it's Fun and Feisty. And off the pace winner, the Pocahontas. 3 lengths in the end.
So Fun and Feisty got the victory there. We were disappointed in Grand Love making the lead for Asmussen and fading. My apologies to Travis Stone. I completely blew the toss to it. I don't know why I was going to say Travis Lewis. And I'm like, there's no track announcer named Travis Lewis. What are you thinking in your head? So just click the video and you'll come to you while the race is going on. Travis Stone, of course, one of the great voices in racing, Jeff. As for the Pocahontas Stakes, though, what do you make of this one here and the disappointment for Asmussen and the success for the McPeak trainee?
I like Grand Love in this race, and she cruised to the lead. She broke running. She didn't have to be sent. She just kind of breezed to the lead. The fractions were comfortable enough, 48, 112, and 3. I know the track was dead and all that, but the way she was doing it, I thought she would just keep rolling, and she just hit a wall. I mean, she managed to finish third, but it was a very exhausted and weary third as Fun and Feisty, who had the benefit of 3 sprints under her belt. She had been given a decent foundation, and being by midshipman, you'd figure she'd at least get a mile or middle distance, and she did that. And her numbers were rising with every start, so I could see her improve. I just didn't know if she had the brilliance of the upside that Grand Love had, but she had the experience edge, the foundation, and she went about her business and won going away. So that was a good race for Kenny McPeak, who seems to come up with these young horses. He doesn't They're not $1 million horses, but they run, and this one certainly did. And I'm not sure. I think he's going to train her up to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies now, which would make sense. She doesn't need another race. She's already had 4. And the way she ran here and the style that she employed, Jeremy, I would think that she'd be a legitimate player in that race.
Yeah, and Kenny's usually really good with the 2-year-old filly stretching out and routing. You know he's going to have another filly or two for the Alcibiades at Keeneland. So this one he's already, set to go and stamped the ticket and ready to roll into the Breeders' Cup. So you might see another one from that McPeak Born when we get to Keeneland here in a couple months. Let's go to our 5th and final topic. And as it has been for the last couple months, we talk the stars of tomorrow here on It's Official. These are horses who were impressive maiden breakers that we've seen in recent weeks. And Jeff, you're tapping your inner Kenny Loggins with the headline here. Is Loggins just all right or better than that?
I'm all right. Nobody worry about me. And this colt is more than all right. A first-time starter named Loggins by Go Sapper out of a mare named Beyond Blaine that Brad Cox trained back in the day, and not even that far back in the day. This is her first foal. We're talking about 5 or 6 years ago. She won the Regret at Churchill from way out of it. A deep closing router, which means Loggins, who won sprinting first time out, has a future. He's a massive, big, good-looking colt. They gave a lot of money for him, and he may very well have been the best 2-year-old we saw at Churchill last week, even though this was just a maiden race. But, boy, did he turn some heads.
All right, let's go for the call with Travis Stone. Travis Lewis was a linebacker for Oklahoma about a decade ago. That's why the name popped in my head. Travis Stone with the call with Loggins breaking his maiden.
But Loggins looms on the outside and willingly and easily has come on to take the lead and puts 2 lengths on the field just like that. Loggins in front, heading for the 8th pole. Easy Action fights on from 2nd. Release McCracken is 3rd. Communication Memo is 4th. There's 1 furlong to go, and Loggins is looking good. Loggins rips away from the pack in a stylish performance. Streaks under the wire, 7 lengths to the good.
Very impressive win there by Loggins. No gophers coming out of the track. No Caddyshack to worry about. He was all right in there. Excellent performance by Loggins. And again, that's a 1-turn race versus what we saw with the stakes horses going around 2 turns. Does that translate next time for him? That's what they all need to answer those questions if they're going to get to the big test at 2 and 3.
So when's the race at Keeneland? Keeneland. Could he come back in the Breeders' Futurity and then the Breeders' Cup, or is that too much?
I think we're looking at October 10th. I think opening day might be the 9th.
Okay, so that would be 3 weeks before the Breeders' Cup then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It'll be 4 weeks out from the Breeders' Cup for sure.
Okay.
It's the first Saturday. The meet will be the Breeders' Futurity.
Right.
So he's got about 4 weeks now, and then 4 weeks to then something along those lines. Maybe 3 weeks now. We're getting a little bit closer here to the opening at Keeneland. So yeah, that'd be a quick turnaround. But off a maiden win to that, I think you could bring him back. And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to see Loggins in a race like that. We've got our bonus topic this week on It's Official, and we try to have a little fun with these. Well, sometimes reality just writes the script for us. So this is what happened last week at Los Alamitos. As I scroll through my replays, here's the first race of our 2-race daily double.
And Cross-Examine looms as the late danger if there is one. It's Sayers clear by 2 lengths. Cross-Examine gaining slowly, but Sayers claimed out of his debut by George Paraban as too good, defeating Cross-Examine with Asphalt Andy 3rd, Precedent possibly 4th.
So that's Sayers. If you're a Chicago Bears fan, maybe you cash a ticket, maybe you handicap the race right. Next race rolls along at Los Alamitos, and this happens.
Economical is finishing off nicely near the inside. It's Butkus struggling to shake clear of Smiling at Val. Butkus a neck in front of Smiling at Val. Butkus with the lead. Butkus will win it narrowly over a game of Smiling at Val. Economical 3rd. Mighty Matt probably just held 4th from Mimacho.
So if you're anywhere near Chicago or have sniffed the Chicago Bears history book in your life, Sayers and Butkus winning in back-to-back races has got to be one of the ultimate football Swami plays of all time. Jeff Siegel, these are 2 monsters of the Midway. Of course, Butkus, the great linebacker, Sayers, the great running back, whose knee injury cut his remarkable career short. In today's day and age, Gale Sayers would have probably been back on the field in 6 weeks, but it was a career-ending injury back in his day. What a phenomenal coincidence to have these two. We've seen a lot of Southern California horses named after the old baseball players, right? Yeah. The Clem Labines, Johnny Padres. But for Butkus and Sayers to win in back-to-back races, that was pretty cool.
It was, especially for someone like me who remembered watching them play back in the 60s. Butkus, of course, from University of Illinois, was a two-way player there. Great linebacker and a center when they needed to blow. 3rd and 1, and Butkus was playing center. They just put him in the game and blow everybody away, and then they'd make their first down. And then, of course, Kansas had Gale Sayers, who, if you remember the College All-American game with the NFL champion, previous NFL champion, used to kick off the season, and Sayers showed up, and they made him a defensive back because nobody ever heard of him. I mean, nobody watched Kansas football, and you're going to be.
They still don't.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But Gale said, I think I'm a running back. No, you play defensive back in this game because then he went to camp after that, and then Chicago Bears says, "Don't worry about it, you're a running back." And what a great player he was, and of course, maybe best remembered as part of Brian's song, the movie, and its role he played in that with Brian Piccolo. But if you're a Chicago Bear fan, and I went to the Bears-Rams game last year at SoFi to kick off the season, and trust me, there must be 300,000 Chicago Bear fans living in LA. The whole stadium was Bear fans, even though the Rams won the game. But if you're a Bear fan, you would have had to have had this parlay many times over, if for no other reason than not only were these two horses, they kind of figured, but they were great football players.
I hope my old horse player now buddies Brian W. Spencer and Joe Christofek were paying attention this weekend. I mean, they are big time Chicago Bears fans and through the thick and thin. So hopefully they cashed a ticket on that. That got me thinking though, Jeff, these horses named after great NFL players. You've owned horses in the past and you go with more traditional names, or you bought horses that were already named. If you get a chance to name one after a football player, who are you naming it after?
Well, unfortunately, the person who I would name a horse after passed away a couple of years ago in his 80s. But my favorite football player growing up when I was like 7, 8 years old was a football player named John Arnett, number 26. And he played for USC. Now, I wasn't quite as wise then as I am now. But I loved him at SC, and I loved him with the Rams. And I actually got a thrill of a lifetime. I wasn't one of these kids that worship athletes or anything like that, but I saw John Arnett. In fact, he played in the first Los Angeles Rams game that I ever went to in 1958 against the Baltimore Colts. That was the Colts team that beat the Giants in triple overtime. But I saw him play in November, and I actually got to meet John Arnett in the mid-'80s. Naturally, he was at the racetrack. So I didn't know he was a horse player, but he was. And I saw him at the box seat section at Del Mar, and I told him as a 35-year-old guy, "You were my favorite player of all time. Number 26, I rooted for you with the Rams, and I'm thrilled to meet you." And he was actually at this stage, he must have been in his 60s or 70s. I don't know. He was really impressed. I mean, and very happy that I had remembered him. And then he passed away. He went up to Oregon and he passed away a few years back. But John Arnett, to me, he was. They used to call him Jaguar John because he was such a great running back. Think of Christian McCaffrey back in the 50s and 60s. That was Jaguar John Arnett, and that would be my hero as a young boy. And if I might, now that you bring it up,
Jaguar John would be a really good name, or just Arnett. Or
I'm gonna next time I get a yearling, and I'll get another one eventually. If it's a colt, I'm gonna think about that really, really closely.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. I'm going for a near and dear Oklahoma Sooner, and a guy who, believe it or not, worked for me at one point. I was a sports editor of a magazine in Oklahoma City, and I had the great fortune of hiring none other than Joe Washington to be my football columnist. And Joe Washington, formerly the Washington Redskins and the Baltimore Colts, people may remember him in the NFL, but at the University of Oklahoma, he wore the silver shoes. And Joe Washington was my favorite player, even as a teen who did not like the Washington Redskins. I wanted them when Riggins didn't have the ball to get it out to Little Joe in the flat. That was my guy. His silver shoes were spray painted. He was ahead of his time in the fashion and a fantastic athlete and a really, really good guy. Now works in development with young kids for the university and helping with the foundations. And Joe Washington's just a super guy, and his silver shoes are iconic. So Joe's Silver Shoes, that's what I'm naming a horse when I get into the game. And people won't know unless you're a Sooner fan or unless you're a fan of the old Baltimore Colts or Washington Redskins. You probably won't remember Joe Washington and his silver shoes, but that's the way I would go. Funny story about Joe Washington is one year when I was working at Remington Park, Vince Gill had a celebrity golf tournament every year at the big Memorial Golf Course in Edmond, Oklahoma. And we hosted the reception in the suites area at Remington Park in the penthouse. And I'm talking celebrities. We saw Dick Butkus earlier. He was there. We saw Terry Bradshaw at this thing. Of course, Vince Gill, the big country singer. A lot of great musicians were at these things. Joe Washington was at the event, and Joe had written for me for a magazine that was since defunct, and now we went to work at the racetrack then. So I knew Joe, and I went up and I started talking to him at the table. And he grabs my arm and he says, "Have you ever met Johnny Unitas?" And he's sitting there with Johnny Unitas. And so Joe says, "Hey, Johnny, this is my friend Jeremy." And here I am. I'm like caught up. I'm clammed up. I don't know what to ask Johnny Unitas. Well, it turns out this was like a couple days after the infamous Roberto Alomar spit on the umpire for the Baltimore Orioles when they were playing. And the Toronto was playing in Baltimore, and he spit on the umpire in Baltimore. And I knew Johnny was a Baltimore guy, so I don't know. I had nothing. I was like grabbing, like, what the hell do you ask Johnny Unitas? So my question was, "Hey, what do you make of Roberto Alomar?" And he looks at me and he says, "Roberto Alamar's a punk." And that's the only thing he said to me. And that was the end of the conversation. And I clammed up and walked away. So the only time I ever talked to Johnny Unitas in my life, he told me Roberto Alamar's a punk. And I've got that story to go on now.
And Johnny Unitas was the quarterback of that very first game that I saw, as I mentioned, in 1958. What a great Colt team that was. I mean, you got to be my age to even remember it. But, you had Johnny Unitas and Raymond Berry and Lenny Moore and Big Daddy Lipscomb in that group. And, of course, they won that very famous game against the Giants. But, yeah, Johnny Unitas was not really my favorite, only because he played against my Rams when I was 7 years old. I didn't really like the Colts because of that, and I got my revenge when the Jets beat them 11 years later in the Super Bowl. But I think I would have been in awe too if I had met Johnny Unitas at my age at that time.
Jaguar John Arnett and Joe's Silver Shoes. Look for them in a program near you down the line. But congrats to Butkus and Sayers for their victories in back-to-back races at Los Alamitos this past weekend. That's going to wrap up this week's It's Official. Our 5 topics are now official because Jeff Siegel and I said so. And we'll be back next week to do it all again with 5 new topics. But between now and then, be sure to join us on Friday when we go for our handicapping podcast each week, the First Call podcast presented by First Bet and Express Bet, where Jeff and I will go through 8 weekend stakes races. It's Pennsylvania Derby weekend at Parks. It's Oklahoma Derby weekend at the aforementioned Remington Park. So we'll talk about those races and more coming up on Friday. A lot of work to do, Jeff. They've already entered at Parks, so we can get started.
We can. I mean, it's good. Listen, Santa Anita starts the following week, but we got some great racing, as you mentioned. I'm diving into Parks as soon as the PPs come up, and I'm gonna see if I can make some money prior to Santa Anita, because Santa Anita is going to be great. Can't wait for that. And it's going to be a really, really – it's playoff October as far as I'm concerned for the forces. We got to find out who's going to be good enough to get themselves into the championship program at Breeders' Cup at Keeneland.
That's right. It's high time. We'll talk to you next week, everybody. Be good.